All right, guys, take it away.
All right, so welcome to another evening of Learn About Your Land. This is our third episode in season 1. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about goods from the woods. And that's Kara there waving at you, and I'm still Andy. So here we go. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about non-timber forest products. What are they? We've been talking all about the trees and all about the timber, and we've been telling you might have to thin to keep it healthy. And it seems like we've been talking just about that one sort of dimension. So tonight we're going to talk about other cool stuff. And we're going to identify some resources to help you as you decide that this is really interesting and you want to expand your knowledge.
And before we get too deeply into what they are and examples of them, this is an enormous topic. It's again, like we're going to discuss art tonight. We're not going to hit all of the topics and each famous piece, but if any of you in the chat feel like sharing things with the group, please do. And I'll give you all the disclaimer. Mm-hmm. If someone tells you that a particular fruit, berry, etc. is edible, always look it up and confirm it for yourself. Use reputable resources. So don't blame another person in a chat or me or Andy or extension about it, but tonight, don't feel afraid to share a few
tonight
things.
For this lesson, my name is actually Steve. So it was Steve that sold you down the wrong path, not Andy. All right. So those non-timber forest products. So they're anything other than that timber sale, really. We're going to go through a whole bunch of examples, plants, animals, experiences. They can be naturally occurring or it can be stuff that you're planting and growing out there. Only limited, as we say, by your imagination or maybe your climate zone. We're zone 4 up here, or even zone 3. So why would you be interested in this stuff, So I always find it's a way to enjoy your land in a unique way. You get to connect to it. It's just one more way to do something out there. Because we got a lot more up here in the Northwoods than just, firewood and deer. You can harvest the products for your own use. You might come up with something that you really enjoy. And some folks even make $1 or $2 at it, although there's usually a lot of work involved. But if that's something that intrigues you, there's sometimes an opportunity. All right, so where to start? So as we've been talking about, right, you got to know what's out there. You got to grab your favorite beverage and you got to go and wander around on your property. All right, what is in your woods? I like to keep a sort of a phenology journal. If any of you have bought like a phenology calendar, and it'll tell you, on June 17th, the eastern meadowlark starts laying spotted eggs, and on June 20th, we see the frogs doing whatever. So it's sort of those outdoor happenings and when average time of when in the year they're going on. And you can keep one of those and start building it just on your land. The first wood violet I saw was this day this year, and it was 3 days later the next year, and the last snow was this day, and the first one this day. And so as you start to build that seasonal calendar, when you saw it and where you saw it on your land, you'll start to have a resource to use. And you can expand what you know. We've got a couple example books up here. The internet is stuffed with different books and resources and whatever to help you expand what you already know. There's things to eat. I wrote down crafty things, right? Things to do. There's all sorts of stuff to do out there in your woods. All right, and with that, we're going to walk through a few examples just to stimulate your brain a little bit and see if we can get you rolling here. So, the easy one to think of, right? What can you do in your woods? So we're going to start off with the low-hanging buckets. So maple syrup, right? Y'all know what maple syrup is. Considerations, obviously it's a limited time of the year. You wouldn't go out and try to tap maple trees right now. My favorite little part about this is the constantly changing number of gallons of sap that it takes for a gallon of syrup, right? Some people say 30 and some 50 and some, UW Extension had a publication that said 43, which I found very exact. So I stuck that number in there. Your mileage is going to vary, right? Depends on, the if it's the beginning of the run or later in the run, you know, how much sugar content is in there, how far you're boiling it down. You know, some people like their syrup lighter, some like it to start getting dark and thick. But the takeaway there is it takes a lot of sap to make a gallon of syrup, but a gallon of maple syrup is a lot, right? So one tap on a good sort of, if there's such a thing as an average tree, a good healthy tree might give you 10 or 12 gallons of sap per season. And again, your mileage is going to vary, right? People use buckets like the old school way, or sometimes they put vacuum lines up and they get a lot more per tree. So one of the things that people like to ask or argue about is syrup versus timber, right? And so if you ask a lot of, what's the plural for people who make syrup? Syrupers? It is now. If you ask a lot of syrup folks, they'll tell you that the syrup's much more important to them than timber because they're in it for the experience, and some of them sell their syrup, etc. You'll ask a lot of foresters and they'll say, don't you dare tap that tree, you're going to mess up those saw logs, right? Well, the truth is in the middle, like it usually is. So yes, tapping will likely decrease the timber value of that tree. And the reason being is not only have you bored a few holes in it, some people bore holes all the way around it. I'm talking with my hands again, bore all the way around it, right? Especially in succeeding years, but it's also going to cause a stain up and down the tree. 3 to 4 feet is kind of average, right? So yeah, that bottom saw log, which is usually the most valuable one, may be decreased in value. I say maybe because it might not have had any value in the first place, right? We all as landowners like to think that all of our saw logs are going to be veneer logs and they're all going to be worth, you know, $1,000 a piece, but that's not really the case, right? So, you know, it may be that tree didn't have a whole lot of value for timber in the first place, and so are you really decreasing the value? Maybe not. So one of the things you can do if you're out there looking at your own maple trees, you kind of take a look and say, hey, is this one a big, beautiful, straight saw log looking tree? Well, maybe that's not the one you tap, right? If you're ever interested in the timber side. Or you got one that's kind of got a few splits and seams and knots and twists and funky branches, and maybe it's not ever going to make a good saw log. That might be a good one to stick a tap in, right? So there's that kind of, you know, you can do both in the same bush there, in the same sugar bush. So there's syrup versus timber.
That's another
What?
reason that some of your yard trees would be great ones to tap, because you're never going to make those into timber for the most part. And any logger who looks at a tree in your yard is probably going to tell you they don't want to cut it either, because they don't know how many nails have been stuck in there over the past 100 years. So
Right?
make them easy to access, get them right from the front yard.
Access is key, right? So thanks, Kara. So what do you need to get started? You know, we've all probably seen it in a movie, or if you've ever thought about this, you've probably already attacked YouTube and found it all out. But you need a way to make a hole in the tree. You need something to stick in that hole, right? They call it a spile or a tap. You need some way to collect that syrup. A lot of times nowadays, if you drive around the Northwoods, you'll see plastic bags hanging off trees. You know, not that many folks are still running the old galvanized buckets, but it depends on the experience you're after. You'll see tubing connected all over in the woods. And then, yeah, you need, well, it says metal cans with the plastic liners for sap storage. So assuming you're not boiling it straight out of the tree, you're going to need to store that sap for a little while before you're ready to boil it down. Then you got to have some way to boil it. You know, we've got a local person here who has a custom-made boiler that fits on top of this old, you know, I think it's 1908 wood stove. And then he's got an auto drip to feed the sap in, and he's got a whole thing going on. Or you can do it old fashioned on the stove and make a mess in your kitchen. So whatever size evolution you're after there. You're going to need a thermometer. You're going to need something to do as a filter. And then you're going to have something to stick your syrup in when it's done. That's all pretty simple. People always want to ask, though. They say, well, hey, I've got too much. Can I sell it? So the disclaimer here is I am not your attorney, and nor do I work for the Wisconsin Food Safety Regulating Agency. This is their information here. We have it on extension, and it says if you tap your own tree, collect it, concentrate it, do it yourself, you can sell it from your farm door to door to farmers market. But it still does have to be fully labeled. There's a whole bunch of other reasons where you might actually need to get a license to do it. So, you know, if it was something you're interested in, please do your due diligence. We obviously can't cover all your specific situations in one evening in the lesson here, but it is something you can do, and you probably all know somebody who sells some syrup. And then we do have a Wisconsin maple syrup producers. They got a sweet little logo up here, little website, and also woodlandinfo.org, where you do some of the learn about your land stuff. You can search for syrup there. So tons of support out there. There's Facebook mentor groups. There's all sorts of stuff to help you get going if that's something you're interested in. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Kara for some mushrooms. Take it away, Kara.
So this is actually one of my favorite things to do when I'm out hiking. I will take note of which trail I'm on and what mushrooms I see. Hunting them, I stick with some of the easy ones, and for growing them, surprise, I do the same thing. And growing them is not actually that hard as long as read a few publications and get started in the backyard. And one of my favorite teachers for this would be Sam Thayer's books. You'll see his books on another slide. And his phrase on how to know if you are ready to eat that mushroom you identified is the banana test. Does it taste like a banana? No. It is, if you are as confident in the ID of that mushroom as you are in the ID of a banana, then you are ready to eat that. So starting with a book, bringing some home, and also showing those to a mentor or hiking with a mentor is ideal. Another thing is that if you want to taste it, you better cook it first, of course, after you have identified it. There's almost no mushroom that I'm aware of that you should eat raw, even something that is supposedly edible. Slide. Some of the
Hold on, let
common
me
ones.
back up just a sec there. If you guys didn't catch this, it's a tongue twister. Wisconsin Mycological Society. You can join them, and they have Zoom lectures and ways to find a mentor and just all sorts of good stuff on there. So that's a good one to pay attention to. All right, here we go.
And that is our list of some of the common ones up in this area. If anyone's using the chat, feel free to throw in some of the ones that you may know of.
Especially exactly where you find the morels, like maybe a lat and a long.
Well, I'll be honest, the only time I found morels in Wisconsin was this spring in my front yard. I ate them. So other than that, I have not found a morel. One of the ones that I will find quite frequently are chanterelles. They're also one of the easiest to identify. And then note that last one, bear's head tooth, lion's mane, comb tooth. Wait, remember when someone gives you something like, oh, you know that lion's mane is edible, they may be talking about something other than what I am calling a lion's mane. So to be super sure, look it up, make sure you're looking at the pictures, the scientific name, and finding hopefully that mentor. Know that scientific name. Slide. And it's not important to be able to pronounce it, but to be able to look it up with certainty. I've grown mushrooms, and it's actually a really fun activity to do with a whole group of people. And you can also do it in conjunction with a timber sale, because if you look at that picture, those are awfully similar to logs that might be cast out of the pulp stick side, something that's a little bit smaller than a pulp stick, or a pulp stick that's just a little bit, too short. It didn't make the full 100 inches of trim that a logger needed. Those are perfect to cut into smaller sections for mushroom logs. You can order the materials online. Has anyone here, please throw it in the chat if you had made mushroom logs yourselves besides me. And usually they, like for shiitake mushrooms, you may end up waiting a full year for them to properly inoculate in the log, which is why you make this an annual party, and you can exchange every time someone makes a log for you, you give them a log from last year. And to make them fruit, you can let them naturally fruit out in the woods, out in your backyard, or you can even force them by soaking them in a stream or soaking them in a garbage can full of water. So there's lots of different kinds you can make. Pay attention to the species of log and the directions on how to start that mushroom growing. Typically, you want to make sure that the log you start with is fresh, so it's not already a host to the wrong kind of fungus. Andy, do you have any comments on that?
No.
Okay. And another
Don't
thing,
know
if you're
nothing about
trying
that.
to make a few dollars from something, mushrooms, in my mind, are relatively easy because you can force them and then you can sell them at a farmer's market. Look up all the regulations for that. But raw foods, the closer to raw the food is, usually the less regulation that comes with it. So you can soak those logs and force them in time for certain, festivals and things like that. Next slide. And pretty easy list of things you need, like a knife. Why did we tell you you need a knife? One, it's easy to collect them without a lot of dirt if you cut them off. Two, when you're trying to identify a mushroom, sometimes using that knife to cut down and actually take some of the substrate with you when you're taking it back to sit down with a guidebook with another person and identify it, looking into the soil or other substrate, I say, maybe the log around it, is important because the small fibrous mycelium can also help you identify what mushroom it is. Photograph the mushroom in place, write down where you found it and any other observations about it being fresh. And some people also wonder, like, oh, I've heard you're supposed to collect them in a mesh bag so that the spores will fall out as they go. I won't say yes or no to that, but I will say I've heard that the mushroom is the fruiting structure of that organism. It's there to usually disperse spores, but oftentimes by the time we collect it, it has already done that. But still, my opinion, use a mesh bag. If a few more spores fell out, that wouldn't hurt. Questions on that, Andy? All right, next slide. You guys can ask questions too. Again, that bottom author, Samuel Thayer, is one of my favorites, and I do have one of his books. And starting with beginner's guides for mushrooms is also a great idea because we don't need to get into rare and less tasty things until much later in our journey of foraging. Next slide.
Want to do the berries too, Carrie?
Sure.
All right.
And this is also going to seem very simple, but I have it on my calendar. I've actually written in different berry dates to remind me I need to take time off in order to get those, because 3 years ago, I missed 2 berry seasons in a row until I wrote it on the calendar, and it repeats every year. When you're choosing if you want to get canes or bushes, pay attention to, Andy mentioned our hardiness zone and the time of year you would like it to fruit, because you can have summer raspberries versus fall raspberries. I love the ones that grow outside the station here because they typically grow right up until Halloween or the first heavy frost. Next slide.
Hey, Carrie, we had a question about chaga in the chat. Which I guess we should have tossed that one in there. Everybody's interested. It says, we understand chaga is high in antioxidants. Is there a good time of year to harvest this fungus? And is there a proper way to harvest without harming the tree? I'll let you tackle that one.
I'm not going to be an expert in chaga, but I have looked this up before, probably not from all of the sources I should have. So without harming the tree and without harming the chaga itself, do leave a majority of the chaga growth in place, is what I have been told. And I have not heard of a particular time of year to harvest this. I've been with people when they've harvested it at any time. We could probably look that one up and maybe get a little bit more information in the next few days. Anyone else in the audience? I know you guys know chaga. Feel free to put your thoughts out there too. But for me, my answer right now is that do leave the majority of the chaga in place, taking some off the surface. All right. Next slide. And also the chaga, well, never mind, we'll keep going. And these are, I have only consumed one of the 3 of these listed berries. Service berries are delicious. You can eat them right off the tree.
And they're ripe right now.
Yes. They're a little bit
grown all over.
seedy, and I have seen them for sale in farmers markets as well. And then bearberry and partridgeberry. As you look from left to right, bearberry, partridgeberry, serviceberry in pictures. Identifying the difference between bearberry and partridgeberry you can do with a field guide. I use the fact that partridgeberry has a light line down the middle of its leaf. And as you look at them, they're slightly less glossy, they're a little bit darker green in the leaf, but the fruit is what we're after. Both of these fruits will taste terrible, in my opinion, if you eat them raw. And a lot of these wild fruits, they need to be cooked and have sugar added to make them more palatable. And almost any one of these very tart fruits, people will say, they taste awfully like a cranberry. But I have yet to try them. And both partridgeberry and bearberry are something that you can grow in your garden. And they're slow spreading, but they do make pretty good ground cover over a long period of time. Serviceberry, also another beautiful tree that you could have in your yard, only gets to be maybe 35 feet tall max, slightly shrubby, beautiful bloom in the spring and white. And then the wind scatters petals over your yard like a little bit of natural confetti. Next slide.
All right, we got Bill wants in on our berry picking patch. He says, what kind of forest do you find those berries in?
Bill, you're good. I would, Andy, do you know the habitat types they grow in? Because I feel like partridgeberry, I have seen in a slightly, and bearberry, rather well-drained soils.
Yeah, I'm not sure about those two. The serviceberry, that one on the right, that's growing 20 feet from where I am right now in my backyard. I've got sort of a stony, sandy loam going. You know, kind of, yeah, I think it wants to be a pine forest. I've got aspen and pine out there. You know, the raspberries and the fall raspberries and the blackberries, you know, anywhere along the edges that you find them. These low bush blueberries that we get up here, I very often find those in sandier, more acidic soils under the conifers. Of course, under the conifers, a lot of times they won't actually fruit, but you get to the edge of that conifer stand where they're getting the sun, and all of a sudden you'll see a bunch of them there. So, yep, it's a good question.
And I just used one of my favorite books. I don't know if we've mentioned this, probably have. This is, of course, it looks backwards. A Guide to Forest Communities and Habitat Types of Northern Wisconsin. Some people will call this Kotar's Habitat Guide. And I enjoy this book. If you're super nerdy and want to really know your plants and your forest communities, eventually this is a book you may use. But to answer for partridgeberry, it is usually in a dry and moderately nutrient-rich soil. Dry, but nutrient-rich. And that is something I learned from this book. But every berry is going to be different. Next slide.
And that's where your journal comes in too. If you see, you know, you might see the partridge berry after the berries of, you know, the birds have all got them, but you recognize the plant. You can log down where you saw that so that next year, when it's the right time, you know just where to go. Kind of like logging down where you saw the asparagus growing on the side of the road. If you go to look for it in the spring when the snow just goes away, you never find it. You gotta log where you saw the big plants in August, so you know where to go back to in the spring. I give you my asparagus hunting secret.
And pretty simple things to start. Get a guidebook and choose whether or not you want to try to cultivate these in your backyard. if you are going to do that, you're going to end up doing a little bit of reading about your soil, drainage, and other amendments you might have to do in order to grow them. Next slide.
All right. I tossed this list up there. Seems like all we're talking about is stuff to eat. I promise there will be something else coming up. Other plants that you've got in your woods up here in Douglas and Bayfield counties that you may or may not think about. We've got sweet fern up here. Full disclaimer, your mileage may vary. I think it makes a delicious tea. We've got hazelnut, we've got wintergreen, we've got mullein, cattails, which people call, I think the nickname for it is the grocery store, the swamp or something I read. All sorts of parts of the cattail are useful. We've got wild leeks up here and a whole bunch of other plants with possible medicinal uses if that's something that interests you. So folks, there's a lot of stuff. Sometimes it seems like all we've got in most of our woods is aspen, or all we've got is, red pine plantations, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on out there. All right. Kara, I think you wrote this one down. I'll let you take this slide.
Yes, because I'm the person who's all about eating everything outside. But when you're going to do that, you have to make sure you read about each species and how to harvest them. For example, I didn't know this. I was destroying wild leeks up until this year. Typically, you should only harvest the leaf greens of wild leeks, at least in many situations, because it takes so long for that plant to recolonize an area. So wild leeks, typically harvest some of the greens and not more than, I believe, a half or a third of each clump that you find. And the same with something like ostrich fern fiddleheads. They look like little shrimp of the woods. They're just that fern before it has curled and fanned out. They're great with butter and garlic. But you shouldn't pick fiddleheads if there are less than 4 fern fiddleheads in a clump. And don't pick more than 2 of 4, or typically a third of each bunch. But remember, that doesn't work well if I pick a third of each clump, then Mr. Wilcox comes along and picks a third of the remaining clump. So be cognizant of picking in super high traffic areas, and of course, the rules and regulations of each kind of property you're on. But if you want to overutilize things, please overutilize non-native species. It is going to be very difficult for any of us to overutilize something like garlic mustard. That's the bottom left photo. I'm sure most of you have heard of that. It grows very well in rich northern hardwoods forest understories, and it disrupts the mycorrhizal connections between trees, if people read about tree connections, and it can also just crowd out all of the other native plants, even down to crowding out tree seedlings. Common tansy, pick beautiful bouquets of that, dry it, get it before the seeds set. Another non-native plant that was brought here for medicinal and decorative uses. Japanese knotweed was my new discovery this year. Some people think it looks really cool because it looks a little bit like bamboo, but it can even get into the edges of your foundation and mess up a house a little bit. Non-native, you can pick them and steam them when they're less than a foot tall. People say they taste a bit like asparagus. And autumn olive, I just read about, haven't utilized it, so do look that one up. Some people say that you can cook the fruit. I am questioning that one, but kill autumn olive anyway, another non-native invasive plant. Next slide.
All right. So now we're going to talk about something you probably don't want to eat. So we got, I mean, I guess you could. So balsam boughs are sometimes a big thing up here.
You can make a tea out of that.
There you go.
You can. You can.
Balsam boughs up here. We got a picture. If you're not that familiar, quick reminder of what the balsams look like. Of course, they go for just the sort of things you think. Those holiday decorations. There's a big industry up here with gathering the boughs here in Minnesota. So your season is early October to early December. And the reason you're not starting till then is that you need 2 good hard frosts to really kind of set the needles so the needles aren't all falling off. They are sold by weight. So when you sell them to a bough buyer, it'll be by weight. And there's little damage done to the tree when it's done properly, and we'll have just the slightest little diagram on that. It does require a permit when harvesting from public lands. And so this and birch poles we're going to talk about are also one of the ways that you can get on the wrong side of the law if you're harvesting on public lands without that permit. And typically the bough buyer or the birch pole buyer will need to see your permit, or if you're harvesting on private lands, a written permission that the stuff was gathered there with permission from that private landowner and where that land was, just to try to cut down on the illicit gathering that sometimes happens up here in the north. So I stole these facts from Minnesota because they have a whole lot more information on it available than Wisconsin. So they're saying a good day's picking can yield 1,000 pounds of boughs, which is a lot. So, you know, we'll see people up here picking and they've got a trailer behind the SUV and they're just stacking it full because it's going to take a lot of space to store. You imagine they're kind of fluffy, you know, they're not really dense. It's not like 1,000 pounds of firewood. Apparently there's some, you know, this is a Minnesota statistic that there's a significant amount of money that can be made. And they have, you know, resales and et cetera. So there's some economic opportunity there with bough harvest, especially if you've got, you know, you might have a 5-acre grove of balsams growing on one part of your property, and it's easy for you to get to. So the boughs versus the branches. So you're cutting from the lower portion of the tree, where the fronds, if you will, or the boughs are all flatter. You know, if you look at the top of the tree, a lot of times they round out, but down on the bottom they're flat. And you're not cutting the whole branch all the way back at the stem. You're leaving several spikes to make a new branch. And when Lauren or Bill sends this out, you'll be able to blow up this picture. This brochure, for better or worse, is all over on the internet. But it'll show you kind of the lengths you're looking at, talking about, you know, the preferred length, how big, you know, the end should be, you know, not really any bigger than a pencil, all that kind of stuff. So it is definitely an activity that goes on up here. And if you live up in this area, you see people going by with them. Improper harvesting, I thought I'd toss this in there. I'm hoping that if you're going to become a bough billionaire, that you're going to take the time to learn how to do it properly. But things that you don't want to be out there doing, chopping down the tree to get the boughs, there's no need to. Harvesting from little ones, from baby trees, you know, if they're not 5 feet tall, they probably need all they can get to grow, you know, so they don't want to steal in their boughs. Cutting more than half the height of the tree, you know, if you got a 10-foot tree, you wouldn't want to cut the boughs from the bottom 7 feet and leave it just this tiny little bit on top, right? You're taking its food. So you want to make sure that you're leaving enough of enough of the needles for that tree to survive and thrive. You know, stripping all the branches from the tree, cutting the branches all the way back to the trunk like we just saw in the previous one. So those are all kind of the no-nos of bough harvesting. And we'll slide right into birch poles. Carrie, you want to take this one?
This is another one of those things that, as Andy said, people can get in trouble with if they're not careful.
Carrie, you're a little quiet.
Thank you. So birch poles have gotten very popular for decorations, and interestingly, you can get current prices I saw for one buyer in this region was 75 cents a stem, and they wanted them to be at least 8 feet long. But if you sell them on, you know, Etsy or yourself, you can get multiple dollars per stem or per stick. So that's why Andy put in there, as much as you can retail.
Yeah. I was just out of blind curiosity. I hopped on Etsy and I saw some of these going for 20 bucks a piece. So it depends on if you want to, you know, how you want to do it. Some people want to deal with that whole thing and try to make, you know, 6-foot long boxes to ship sticks. And some people just want to take them by the truckload. They've got too much birch on their land anyway.
And you're going to end up cutting the entire tree at that point. So it's not something like with a bough where you cut it and you're going to have a little chunk grow back next year and harvest it again or something like that. be very careful with your permits and which stands you're harvesting from. Next slide. That top picture is an example of how these birch often will grow on old skid trails or forest roads. So there's an opportunity if you have on your land a forest road that you're going to have to open up for other uses in the future, then why not harvest those birch poles? I think that's a great place to get them from, because if you end up removing a lot of birch and not leaving enough to regenerate, you could be adding to the overall decline of birch across the landscape. Birch needs disturbance to regenerate, and maybe we're not getting a lot of that. There's a lot of other factors that are going into birch regeneration. Also notice in that picture, that's a thick grove of birch. Every single birch stem is not going to make it to full tree height. So you could thin those 2 to 4 inch size birch and possibly simply favor the trees that look like they're going to be the most dominant and take those smaller suppressed trees that may die anyway. Proceed with caution on thinning because you can overthin.
Yep. So if the thought of becoming an Etsy birch pole millionaire has got you intrigued, you know, look into what sort of sizes people are looking at. You know, I've seen stuff as small as 1 inch. You know, sometimes bigger ones have a market. You know, if you're gonna, there's not many places up here that'll give you a permit to do this on public lands. We've tried, you know, like a permit a year out of the state forest kind of thing. Once in a while, a county will. But you can ask, you know, especially if you kind of sell it to them, like, hey, if you've got a logging road that you're going to have to open up next year for a sale anyway, and that might kind of spur that thought in someone's head. But there is a big problem with birch pole theft up here. So if you're going down the road with a Ford Ranger full of birch poles, you can expect to get some attention from the law. So make sure you've got your permit with you. You've got your, you know, where you're taking them to. If it's your own land, you know, you want to be able to document that you got them there. Or if it's your neighbor's land, you've got written permission, that sort of thing. Just because we do have people going out no kidding, in the middle of the night and chainsawing an acre of these things and stuffing them in the back of a dump truck and hauling off with them. So, but there is an opportunity there, especially if you've got, like Kara said, you know, you've got a big stand of them there that needs something done. All right, utilitarian examples. We're going to go through a couple of these. I thought the shed antlers is pretty cool. This has just become a recent thing. I'm not any good at finding shed antlers. I've found 2 in my entire life, but my coworker stumbles upon one every time he's out in the woods. And apparently everybody's turning them into dog chew toys, which my parents have one for their dog, and the dog loves it, but it runs around and bangs in the shins with him. So, you know, buyer beware. We're going to talk about seed collection, which is something you may not have thought about. There's hunting leases. Some people even lease out, you know, subject to their zoning and whatever, of course, you know, camping on their land and all sorts of other experiences or things to do. We're going to talk a little bit about firewood. If you live in the north, you either know about firewood because you use it, or you know about it because you know you don't want to use it anymore. But if you're not, if you're not from the area and you're kind of curious, here's a quick down and dirty. You know, not every tree makes good firewood. I've burned willow when I was desperate, but I won't do it again. So what trees are in your woods? You know, their species, their size, their location. Believe it or not, that 37-inch white oak that's up at the top of the hill at the far side of your place might not be the one you want for firewood, especially if you don't have a tractor to haul it. So think about all that sort of stuff. Time of year in storage, you know, when are you going to go in there with access? You know, is your land a little wet and you need to go in there when it's frozen? You know, or is there too much snow and you need to wait until spring, or you're going to get stuck in the mud? Please do, if you weren't thinking about it, think about it from now on, about the oak wilt guidelines we talked about. You don't want to be out there thinning out your oak forest in May, even if it is a nice day to be out in the woods. I always made firewood in the middle of winter because I always got overheated anyway, so I didn't want to do it in the summer with the black flies. And firewood, whether you're going to sell it or whether you're going to use it yourself, of course, it needs to be seasoned. You know, you can't, for the most part, you can't cut it down and burn it that day unless you're, sometimes people do that in a wood boiler, but mostly not. I want to toss in their safety, especially if this isn't something you've been doing all your life. You know, there's a lot that goes into cutting firewood from actually a standing tree out in the woods. So, you know, there's felling the tree, there's limbing and skidding and bucking and splitting and stacking and moving it again and again, right? So there's a lot of work to it, and a lot of it is dangerous. And then we want to talk about a little bit about gypsy moth. So a lot of folks don't think about gypsy moth much. I actually just found gypsy moth caterpillars in Bayfield County just a couple weeks ago. So it is illegal to move uncertified firewood, and firewood that you make yourself would likely be uncertified, from any county that's been quarantined to a non-quarantine county, even if you're taking it to your own place, right? And so basically quarantine and non-quarantine, this is effective May of this year. You can't take it from a red one to a white one. So even if you own land in both Douglas and Bayfield counties, you can't take firewood, any firewood, regardless of the species, across that county line. And we have other restrictions as far as, you know, truckers taking stuff across state lines, et cetera. As far as, and this is for gypsy moth, as far as emerald ash borer, we're now under a statewide quarantine. Used to be we had the same sort of county polka dot thing with the emerald ash borer. Because it's been found almost everywhere, we're on a statewide quarantine now. So you could move ash, you know, county to county, but not for gypsy moth, even if it was ash. So just something to be in mind or mindful of. And that goes for if you're going camping too. Don't bring your firewood from Marathon County over to Polk County to go camping. All right. So selling seed to the DNR might be something that you never thought of. We've been doing this, the DNR, for a lot of years. We run several state forest nurseries. And of course we need seed for those. And there's, while we do have some seed orchards, as we call them, where we collect seed, we always have more stuff that we need that we'll buy from the public. And so this chart on the right is last year. So you see 2020, it changes every year, but just gives you kind of an example of you know, what species we're buying. You can see how many we think we're going to buy. You know, we're buying a lot of red pine. You know, we're not buying very much black spruce, that kind of thing. And that changes every year too. It might be that one year we sell a lot of, you know, whatever, sell a lot of yellow birch seed to some program. And so then we got to buy a lot more. Gives you an approximate date. There's a whole seed gathering like newsletter if you become one of our tree seed providers. Basically how it works, especially now with COVID, I'm one of the buyers, and in that newsletter that you get if you want to do this, it'll list all the buyers in the area, their phone number, and last year and this year we're by appointment only. So you call up, you say, hey, I've got 5 bushels of you know, white spruce cones, and I want to bring them by. They'll be inspected. There's a whole list of things you have to do. You know, every species is different as far as how we want the seed treated. Obviously, you can't bring us a bunch of pine cones that have opened and all the seeds are gone. You know, hey, I picked these up off the ground. So it is typically pretty involved. For instance, some of these you really can't harvest without cutting the tree down. Like I don't see tamarack on there this year, but tamarack cones we sometimes buy, and it's pretty hard to harvest those because they're always way up in the top of the tree. And of course, you can't go do that on public land, just cut the tree down, right? But maybe you've got a whole bunch of tamarack and you need to move some out anyway, and during the time that's the seeds right, you're able to do that. So the price changes each year, like I said, and the quantities. So it's definitely something, you know, check before you go out and get a hold of us. So like I said, each seed has a specific requirement for how we handle it, clean it, store it, what time of year. So you can start with that, you know, and when you get the copy, you'll have the URL there. And, you know, you've got competition. This guy's a professional and you're an amateur. So, you know, you're out there competing. It's typically a kind of a rush job, right? The seeds are ready, and then every bird, squirrel, chipmunk, whoever, bear, they're all out there trying to gather just like you. So it's one of those things that you got to be ready for it when the time comes up. All right. Carrie, you want to take us out to the end?
I do. So this is some of the basics. Any particular product you're interested in, become the expert on it. It's very likely that for non-timber forest products, you might be the expert in your area. So definitely look up the sustainable harvesting practices and realize that most of these things can be done without long-term damage to your land and in conjunction with standard forestry. Yeah, that example, firewood, you pick the trees that you would remove rather than your sawlog trees for your firewood. Use each tree that you cut to be a release for a crop tree. Slide.
Absolutely. And then if you ask her how to do it, you can grow mushrooms on the remaining pieces, apparently.
It really is a good time and a great way to start.
I
It's
might have to start.
very pleasing. So whatever you already do, feel free to continue researching that and expanding on it. And as Andy said, having an understanding of what's out on your property and putting that in a calendar every year to take advantage of that. Most of these things have a short window of ripeness or a proper time of year. So you got to be ready to roll when the season comes around. Next slide. This is where I would also love you guys to share some of your knowledge with where you learned. For example, the DNR does do courses. There's Learn to Trap. There's, for me, I've looked at the Becoming an Outdoors Woman, and that's partially sponsored through different universities. So check out online, search for some of the different classes that might be available in your county and surrounding counties. Of course, 2020 and 2021 have been a bit of an anomaly with a lot of the classes canceled, but there's great places to learn. And not only do you learn about what's in that topic from the instructors, you might learn from the other students and find another thing that you'd like to do.
Right.
And because of COVID, I actually started taking agroforestry classes. When you start thinking about starting to say, grow mushrooms in the understory of your forest and utilizing the shade and the temperature, you're starting to switch from straight forestry. It's not quite farming to a combination of both things. And the Center for Agroforestry has podcasts on growing different medicinal plants, collecting them, propagating them, and really finding the intersection between marketable goods and wild collection. If you want to have a little bit more of a field trip and a one-time weekend, Andy and I and some of our coworkers have put on programs through, excuse me, the Natural Resource Foundation. A lot of DNR employees lead trips and tours. Some of them might be things like eagle banding, which isn't quite a non-forest product, but other things could be wild mushroom identification and other things like that. A lot of community colleges also have community enrichment that they have on their campus, and I've done some of that. Any other thoughts?
Absolutely. And I didn't mean absolutely have more thoughts. I was agreeing with you. And a lot of times you can find that hard to find mentor at some of these places. You do a little networking and you find out that your neighbor came along and you never knew your neighbor was a mushroom expert or made the best serviceberry jam or has been cutting balsam boughs for 20 years and knows all the good buyers. As you get kind of further off of center and you get into some of these things that are a little less popular, it really is great to get a mentor to help you, to help you get it going the right way and get you down the right path there. And this is a great way to find them.
Next slide.
And with that, for the first time ever, we are done on time. And so if you've been sitting on a question and it's just been burning a hole in your pocket, now's the time. Even about the other two lectures, if you had something that popped up in your brain, we can try to grab something from one of them too if we don't have any more on goods from your woods. We got to have one question.
Can't.
Bill can't ask it.
I have a question.
All right.
I've heard that gooseberries, there's a relationship with some type of mold that it destroys white pines. But so I've heard that you should not grow gooseberries because we do have a lot of white pines. On the other hand, my gardening magazine is suggesting that now it's safe to grow gooseberries.
Yes, yes, and yes, and no. Andy, do you have comments on this before I go wild?
I sure don't.
Okay, so this is a great intersection between forestry and foraging and a little bit of history. The Civilian Conservation Corps. I feel like some of you guys already know this story. So gooseberries are part of the ribes family, or genus. I have to get that right. And they are an alternate host for white pine blister rust. So when we found that out, I say we as the collective forestry community, back in the Civilian Conservation Corps days, people were sent out to pull out all the gooseberries, the ribes, to save the white pine. As it turns out, there's also another alternate host. So all that work with the ribes didn't really have the entire effect that we were hoping for. So my opinion is that as long as you're not trying to cultivate, an agroforestry situation of growing a beautiful stand of white pine and then semi-farming gooseberries, ribes underneath, I think you should be fine. I have forester friends who are also torn on the subject. So a strong up for debate, but my opinion is that you're probably pretty safe to have gooseberries because there are other alternate hosts for white pine blister rust.
Thank you.
All right, let's see here. Did we send out the PowerPoints for the last meeting and the recording? I'll toss that over to Bill. I don't think we sent out the PowerPoints yet. We had a little issue with the PowerPoint being too large, so we're still working that. I don't know about the recording.
I'm not sure. I think Lauren included that in the email, but if not, I can tell her to include it again. And I'm recording this one and we'll post it to YouTube. So there should be a link in the next email she sends.
All right. Somebody asked me, when is the best time of year or season for the forester to come out and review your land? We really can come out anytime. If you're trying to get a hold of a DNR forester, we're sometimes pretty busy from when the snow melts until about the 1st of June. That's our wildfire season. But we can get out there anytime. If you don't like snowshoes, you might want to keep that in mind because we're used to snowshoes. We'll take you with us out there, but maybe that's not what you're after. It can be very beneficial to have us come out in kind of that mid-fall time frame when some of the leaves have started coming off if we're looking at your hardwoods, because that lets us really see up into the canopy a little better without dragging you through 3 feet of snow to do it in January. But yeah, we can really come out anytime. And Bill says he has a lot of hazelnut shrubs, but never got a nut. What is he doing wrong? You remember that picture of the professional? He's got that long bushy tail. I actually have about 20 acres of hazelnut going right now. And I get, oh, there we go. Hazelnut, another research from Extension. I get a lot of nuts every year, but I never collect any. We've got 2 kinds of hazel up here, the common hazelnut and the beaked hazelnut. Sometimes, the shrub is there, but it's not, it's not having a good year and it's not going to have excess energy to put out a seed crop. I do notice that we get heavier and lighter crops of hazelnuts, just like you get a heavy year for acorns or a light year for acorns. But I've never been able to get at one of the hazelnuts that I wanted to eat. It seems like by the time they're ready, then the worms or the critters have got them, but good luck for that. You can have some of mine. Did we get all the questions here? Bill is our straight man. He's got to plant all the questions if we haven't thought of it yet. He says, could you talk about club moss? And that's all Kara.
Okay. So if anyone cares about club moss, stay on because I think it's super cool. What it is, is it looks a lot like a moss, but it actually has internal vascular tissue. So it stands up a little bit taller. And why is that cool? There's something called running pine that is a little bit protected and a little bit sought after. It depends on your location and your state. But if you find running club moss and you pull on it, you will find runners of that moving out into the forest, and you can pull it up and make a wreath out of it. That's one of those things where you have to practice some ethical gathering and look up the rules, because club moss in some places has become more rare, or at least running club moss, because people started pulling it because it's so easy to make into a wreath. There's other kinds of club moss, which people usually don't pick quite as much. So I'm thinking that running club moss is the one that people are usually most interested in.
All right, Bill's trying to stump us. How do you know if the acorns you gather are any good to eat or to plant? Well,
Taste
for
'em.
planting, right? That's what I was going to say. For planting, and in fact, if you gather them for the DNR, we're going to have you float test them. So you're gonna put them in a pail, and you're gonna fill a pail with water, and if the acorns float, we don't want them. If they're any good to eat, I guess if you've got a bushy tail and gray fur, they're all good to eat. The acorns from the white oaks are generally sweeter, and from the red oaks are a little more bitter. So if you know what tree it fell from, and you're really excited to make acorn flour, I would go with the white oaks. But I don't think I've ever actually eaten a red oak acorn. So somebody can try and tell me how it goes. Let's see, somebody asked, are there any specific insects or diseases that affect maple trees in northern Wisconsin? Lots, but they as of yet don't seem to be at that sort of impending disaster level. We have something we call maple dieback or tip dieback. It doesn't affect whole stands, it seems. That gypsy moth will eat anything it can get at. So we have a few. Probably weed whackers are hardest on the maple trees in the yard. But yeah, nothing like the emerald ash borer that's going to come and swipe it off. In fact, sometimes foresters worry about mapleification, as we made up the word, because not only are they shade tolerant, but there's no specific huge pest coming in for them. So we're kind of worried that all the ash and the oaks are going to give way to just endless miles of maple and balsam fir sometimes. All right, we're getting lots of questions tonight. It's because we stopped on time.
Stumpers.
Right?
That's kind of a joke.
Oh, I get it now. I see what you did there. All right. Well, folks, I hope that this piqued your interest with something else that you can do out there on the land that you own. Like I said, I find it neat to just go out and find some other way to connect to it, give you something to do in every season, instead of maybe only winter or before you only hunted deer, and now you can look at something else to do. Gives you a little different connection to your land. And I think, to be respectful of your time, if there's more questions, please. Otherwise, we're about wrapped up, Bill.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And again, if you have questions, we'll be sending you the contact information for Andy and Kara. Feel free to reach out to them if you want a question or you want to schedule a walkthrough. Otherwise, thanks for attending the classes, and enjoy the rest of the summer while you still can. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very much. It was a very good show.